would that be when you and Officer Haddon arrived at 849 South Broadway?
Correct.
And then it has, the next entry is 5/21/2016. It has 21/22/57. So that would be 9/22.
Correct.
Okay. And it says, go ahead. I'll have you read this. What does it say after that?
Met with Vic, Chuck Loke, verified husband left Loke, Vic advised verbal.
Okay, go ahead into the next, go ahead and go into the next page, or next line. Go ahead.
Dispute and refuse to give any further info, issued business card.
Who wrote those two lines?
I don't recall.
And what did that mean to you, those two lines that you just read?
It's a disposition of what happened at the call.
Okay, can you tell me what that means? I mean, just tell me in real person's words what those words are.
Yeah, that we met with the victim, we checked the location, the husband wasn't there, and that the victim advised us that she just had an argument and that she wasn't going to give us any further information. And because we didn't identify a crime, we issued her a business card letting her know that she could reach out to us later if she changed her mind and wanted to cooperate.
Okay. And at what point did you close this incident?
Whatever it says on the screen, let's see, 9/22/57.
Okay. And what did incident closed mean?
That we cleared from the location. We were complete. Done.
Okay. Now, if we could go to page Bates stamp number 12. And do you recognize this document?
I do. It's a summary of all of our calls from that day.
All right. And I believe you testified earlier that you reviewed this document in preparation for this deposition. Is that correct?
Yes, I did. Correct.
Okay. And if we can go down to right here, that's 9/22, correct, at the end of that?
Correct.
All right. And it says 242D, domestic violence. What is that?
It's a code for domestic violence.
And what does the 242D mean?
That's battery.
Officer Science, when we broke before the lunch break, I had just asked you about whether you had believed that you were at the penthouse on May 21st, 2016 for 30 to 60 minutes. Do you recall me asking that?
Yes, I do.
And do you recall testifying that that's what you thought was the time that you and Officer Haddon spent at the penthouse on May 21st, 2016?
Yes, I recall.
Okay. And in fact, it was significantly less, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And in fact, it was, you entered from the elevator at 9:04 p.m. and went back into the elevator at 9:19, for a total of 15 total minutes, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And we've seen the video clips of you getting on the elevator and getting off, and that's where those timestamps come from. Now, once you got off the elevator at 9:04 p.m., the first thing you did was listen for some noise, correct?
Correct.
All right. And then you went around and checked out the outdoor courtyard to see if anyone was outside. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And you saw that there was a woman in the gym who was not related to the incident. Do you recall that?
Correct.
How did you know the woman was not related to the incident?
Because she seemed unfazed. She was just working out.
Did you speak with her?
No, I didn't.
Do you recall what she looked like?
I don't.
Now, did you take any notes during the entire 15 minutes from when you got off the elevator till when you got back on the elevator
I did not.
Did Officer Haddon, to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. Did you take pictures or record anything?
I did not.
So after you saw the woman in the gym and looked at the perimeter, you went back to the hallway and you met with what you called a white male who was generic. Do you recall using that term?
They asked me to describe him, yes.
And you said generic, correct? And what do you mean by generic?
He didn't have any identifying, I don't know, nothing that I could remember. I just remember a male white, nothing out of the ordinary.
What color was his hair?
I don't even remember now.
Did he have facial hair, a beard, or a mustache?
I don't remember.
Do you recall how tall he was, roughly?
I don't remember anything about him.
Did you ask him his name?
I don't recall.
Okay. Now, the generic white male talked with you. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And when you first saw Amber Heard, she was crying, red-eyed, and was not making eye contact with you, correct?
Correct.
And you asked her a few questions, and it was quite clear that she did not want to speak to the police. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, Amber Heard was visibly upset, so she would look down. Sometimes she would look up at you when she spoke, but was back and forth, correct?
Correct.
What was Amber Heard wearing that night?
I don't recall.
What hairstyle did Amber Heard have that night?
I don't recall.
Now, when was the first time you were asked to provide details of the events of May 21, 2016?
I don't recall.
Do you recall providing your testimony at a deposition in July of 2016?
Correct.
Is that the first time you were asked to provide any details of what your recollection was of the events of May 21, 2016?
Correct.
Okay. And that was roughly 2 months later, is that correct?
Correct.
And how many shifts had you worked in that 2-month period?
I'm not aware. I don't know.
How many calls had you answered in those 2 months?
I don't know that number.
How many of those calls were domestic violence calls in those 2 months?
I don't know that number.
And if you saw any signs of injury on Amber Heard, or even just damage to property, would you have been duty bound to make a report?
Correct.
Now, your recollection is that there was no damage to the flat. You searched the entire flat and there was no damage, broken glass, or anything out of the ordinary. Would you agree?
Correct.
Did you see anything, did you observe anything out of the ordinary during this particular call that you answered at the penthouse on May 21, 2016?
I did not.
When you left that call, when you got back into that elevator, do you recall what you were thinking?
I remember being impressed by the penthouse, how big and beautiful it was, yes.
But anything else?
No, nothing.
And just so we can stay on that for a minute, you had not heard of Amber Heard at the time of this report, right, on May 21st, 2016?
Correct.
But you did know that Johnny Depp was an actor, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you didn't know that that was Johnny Depp's penthouse when you reported there, correct?
Correct.
But you, as you just said, were impressed with the penthouse. Would it be fair to say you thought probably somebody with some wealth lived there?
Correct.
Can you bring up plaintiff's exhibit number 23? Officer Science, do you recognize this elevator at all?
Yes, I do.
What do you recall?
That's the elevator from the location.
Okay. Alex, I'm going to ask you to go to 211940. And as you're moving that, Officer Sines, I'm going to ask you to take a look at this and see if you can tell me what you are saying to Officer Haddon in this video clip. That's you, is that correct?
Correct.
And Officer Haddon, do you recognize? Officer Sines, can you tell what you were saying to Officer Haddon?
I cannot.
Does it look like you might have said at the beginning that was crazy?
I can't tell what I was saying.
Would you agree, though, that you were quite animated in your discussion with Officer Haddon?
No, I wouldn't agree.
How would you describe your demeanor?
Comfortably talking to my partner.
All right, I'm going to ask you to take a look at plaintiff's exhibit number 17. And while Alex is bringing that up, so your best recollection is that you saw no injuries on Amber Heard, correct?
Correct.
And your best recollection is you saw no property damage, nothing in disarray, nothing out of the ordinary, correct?
Correct.
And if you had seen either of those, you would have had to file a report, correct?
Correct.
Officer Sines, let me ask you this question. So we've established that you got off the elevator on the penthouse level at 9:04 p.m. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Do you recognize the person here?
Yes, I do. Amber Heard.
Okay. And do you see any signs of injury on Amber Heard's face in this picture?
I do not.
Is it your testimony that you do not perceive this cheek to be reflecting an injury on Amber Heard?
Correct. No injury.
I'm going to ask you to take a look at this section here above the eyelid, and now I think with the, I'm going to ask you to take a look at that eyelid. Is it your perception that that eyelid does not reflect an injury? I'm sorry, what was your answer?
Correct. No injury.
Okay, and then up above on the forehead level where the redness is and it looks like there's a couple of bumps, is it your perception that does not reflect an injury?
Correct.
Officer Sines, I'm going to ask you to look at what has been marked as deposition exhibit number 18, close to the time that you alighted from the elevator, correct?
Correct.
Please describe for me what you see in this photograph.
I see a striped carpet with discoloration on the right-hand side of the photo, and what I perceive as, I don't know if that's a reflection, some sort of mark.
Now, you believed and testified, in fact, that you considered the hallways to be very well lit that night, correct?
Correct.
Did you see this, these stains?
No, not that I recall.
All right. Would you agree that those are reddish stains on the right side?
Correct.
What does it look like from your experience?
Like a stain, like from a liquid.
Red wine, possibly?
It could be, yes.
Okay. But you don't recall seeing that in the hallway after you got off the elevator?
I do not.
And you did not investigate this or take any pictures or record anything about it, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now let's go to number 19. Do you recognize what is depicted in exhibit number 19?
Yes, it's our business card.
And it has 1A1 on the front of it. What is that?
That's our unit designation.
Okay. And then it has Haddon and a badge number. Is that his badge number?
That is his serial number.
Okay, serial number, thank you. And it has your name, and is that your serial number?
Correct.
Who wrote this on the card?
I don't recall.
Would it have been either you or Officer Haddon?
Correct.
Do you recognize your handwriting?
I can't tell from this.
Now, I think you indicated when you were looking at the incident recall and the CAD summary that a business card had been left. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And why did you leave a business card?
I advised Amber Heard that she could contact us at any time if she changed her mind and decided that she wanted to speak to us and cooperate.
All right. Let's go to number 20. Do you recognize this? What's been depicted in this picture?
Yes, I do. It's the back of the business card.
All right. And it says 5/21/2016, and the time is 9:16 p.m. Is that the time that it was written?
Correct.
Okay. And do you recognize the handwriting on this side?
It looks like my handwriting.
Okay. Now it says radio call of dispute. Do you see that?
I do.
Why didn't you put verbal dispute?
It didn't. Verbal dispute. It's the same thing to me.
And you have refused report on here, correct?
Correct.
Could you just read this next part that you wrote on here?
Sure. Advice can call at later time if changes mind, because she was uncooperative and didn't want to speak to us.
Okay. Now, why did you say if changes mind?
Because I was giving her the opportunity to have a resource if she changed her mind.
But if Amber Heard had no injuries and there was no evidence of any type of physical property issues, disarray, breakage, etc., then why would it matter if she changed her mind?
It's a courtesy that I choose to give people when I go to calls.
Now, if Amber Heard had called you later, you had already closed this out and had not written a report and had taken no notes, correct?
Correct.
But if I'm understanding your earlier testimony, that if you saw evidence of injury, or if you saw injury of evidence of property damage, even if the victim did not cooperate, you would write a report, correct?
Correct.
And we'll go to number 21. Officer Sines, this is just a picture. Do you recognize you and Officer Haddon here?
Yes, I do.
Okay, Officer Sines, is the timestamp on here of 9:19 p.m., 49 p.m., does that comport with your recollection of when you left?
I don't recall what time I left. I'm just going based on the video that is in front of me.
Okay, do you have any reason to believe that's incorrect?
I don't.
Officer Steins, I'm going to ask you to take a look at exhibit number 24. Okay. Do you recognize the person in this photo?
Yes, Amber Heard.
Okay. Do you perceive there to be an injury or evidence of injury on Amber's face in this photo?
No, I do not.
What is your perception of the redness on the cheek and the eyelid and above the eyebrow?
It's consistent. I observed her crying. She's fair-skinned. Her face is flushed.
I'm going to ask you to look at what has been marked as exhibit number 25. Do you recognize this as Amber Heard?
Yes, I do.
Do you see a red mark on Amber Heard's cheek and above her eyelid and above her eyebrow on this picture?
Her face looks flushed. Yes, redness.
Okay. And what is your perception of what that is caused by?
Like I said earlier, it's consistent with what I see in her crying.
Right. But you don't think it's consistent with a cell phone being thrown at her?
Correct. It does not look like an injury caused from a cell phone.
Okay. And why not?
Because it's consistent with somebody crying. Her face is flushed.
This was taken on May 21st. I'm going to ask you to look at what has been marked as exhibit number 26. Do you recognize this as Amber Heard?
Yes, I do.
Officer Sines, do you see any redness on Amber Heard's cheek and above her eyelid, and we'll go with those?
I do.
And what is your perception of what the cause of those is, those red marks?
It's consistent with her crying. Her face is flushed.
And is it fair to say that you do not believe that this reflects an injury?
Correct.
And would it also be fair to say that you would not consider it sufficient to investigate further, whether it's an injury?
There's nothing that would stop me from investigating. I would continue to ask her questions, and it's up to the victim if they want to cooperate.
But just so that we're clear here, even if the victim doesn't cooperate, if you see signs of injury, you still, and I believe you testified to this, believe yourself duty-bound to write a report, correct?
Yes.
Okay. But in your mind, you don't perceive this as to be reflective of an injury. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I'm going to ask you to take a look at exhibit number 27. Again, do you recognize this as Amber Heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And do you see redness on the cheek of Amber Heard on this one?
Yes, I do.
All right. And then you had testified on a number of these other pictures and on this one as well that this is consistent with crying. Do you see any redness on Amber's other cheek?
Yes, I do.
Is it the same or similar to the redness on the cheek, on the right cheek?
Based on this photo, it looks like one cheek is redder than the other.
But you also don't see any swelling with that?
Correct.
I'm going to ask you to take a look at what has been marked as exhibit number 28. Do you recognize this as Amber Heard?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And do you see redness on the right cheek and above the eye?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And is it your perception that this reflects any type of, or could reflect any type of injury?
No,
Why not?
because my perception is it was consistent with her crying.
All right, let's take this down, go to 29. I'm going to ask you the same questions. Do you recognize this as Amber Heard?
Yes.
And do you see any redness in the right cheek and above the eyelid?
Yes.
Okay. And is it your perception that these are not indicative of injury?
Yes.
And what is your reasoning?
It's consistent with her crying.
Let's take this one down. Let's go to number 30. Now, you testified earlier that you thoroughly searched the penthouse. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And Josh Drew, the gentleman that you called the generic male, actually took you through, escorted you through the penthouse and the series of penthouses, correct?
Correct.
Officer Sines, did you or did you not thoroughly search the penthouses on May 21st, 2016?
We did search the penthouse.
Okay. And you used the term thoroughly, did you not?
I don't recall.
Okay. Do you feel like you conducted a thorough search of the penthouses that night?
Yes, I did. I did a sweep of the location for the suspect.
Okay. And when you're talking about a sweep of the location, did you go through every room?
Yes, every room.
Okay. And was there anyone escorting you through those rooms?
Yes, the same male that we were met with at the beginning of the call.
That you called the generic male, correct?
Correct.
Now, you also testified a little earlier that this was a very nice series of penthouses, right?
Yes.
Did you interview the woman that was sitting with Amber Heard?
I attempted to. All parties were uncooperative.
What did you say to the woman that was with Miss Heard?
I don't recall the exact words, but I introduced myself to everyone and asked if they seen what happened or know what happened, and they all refused to speak to me.
Did you ask for their names?
I recall, yes, I did ask for their names. Nobody would give me their names.
Now, that's a little unusual, isn't it?
No, it's not. A lot of people don't like us.
Well, is it that they don't like you, or is it potentially that they don't want to, with a domestic violence situation, are reluctant to press charges?
Every situation's different. Based on my training experience where I work, it's usually that people do not like us.
Do you have a recollection of what the woman who was with Amber Heard looks like?
No recollection.
Do you know what color hair she had?
I have zero recollection.
So you don't recall how old she was, how tall she was, what her hairstyle was, what she was wearing, anything about her?
Zero recollection.
But somehow you're sure you tried to interview her and she refused to answer questions.
Yes, it's common practice. I try to interview everyone during my investigation.
So did you pull out your notebook at any time while you were in the penthouse?
I did not. I had nothing to write. No one would speak to me.
Well, how did you know that when you started asking the questions that they weren't going to give an answer?
Because they just looked at me.
But wouldn't you pull out your notebook first and then ask the questions? Then write down the answers as they're giving them to you?
No, I don't put anything in my hands for officer safety issues until I'm sure that I have something to write.
I'm sorry, officer. Can you repeat your answer?
I don't put anything in my hands for officer safety reasons. If I'm not sure I'm going to write, I keep my hands free. When I ask the questions, I got no answers. Therefore, I didn't take out any notebooks or pens.
Did you have any reason to fear for your safety at the time that you were talking with Amber Heard and the woman with her?
I always fear for my safety. A potential suspect could have been in the house. So yes, my guard was not down if that's what you're asking.
What did you do first? Did you look at throughout the house to ensure that the person wasn't there, or did you ask the questions first and then look at the house?
I attempted to ask questions first. I can't just go into a house and start checking it without asking questions.
So what questions did you ask first?
I don't recall specific questions.
Do you recall any of your questions?
I don't.
Do you recall any of the answers that you were given?
I don't recall.
Now, we went through the domestic violence supplemental report and some of the guidelines for officers on domestic violence. Do you recall that the crime scene, a number of the items reflected location ransacked, location vandalized, furniture in disarray, personal property damage? Do you remember those being items as the checklist for crime scene for domestic violence?
As they pertain to domestic violence reports, yes, I do.
Right. Now, did you ever speak with the two officers who answered the second call to the townhouse that night?
I did not.
Did you ever communicate in any manner with the two officers who answered the second call to the penthouse?
I did not.
Did you communicate through a third party to the second set of officers relating to the domestic violence call and your determination?
I did not.
Did you know the two officers who responded to the second call?
Did not.
Sorry. Do you know who they are to this day?
I do not.
Have you ever spoken to the other two officers about the responding to this call on May 21st, 2016?
I have not.
Have you ever spoken with anyone else about your response and their response to this call on May 21st, 2016?
I have not.
And just so everybody's aware, up until now, you've been listening to questioning from Ms. Heard's counsel. At this point, I believe we're going to shift over to questioning from Mr. Depp's counsel.
I want you to focus on